The endless mirror. The rain hammered against the windows, lightning briefly illuminating Emma's new home. She had just moved into the small, old house at the edge of town, a place quiet enough to focus on her studies. It was quaint, but carried an unsettling air, as though the walls held secrets they dared not share. While unpacking, Emma noticed something unusual. An antique mirror leaning against the wall of the living room. Its frame was ornate, with swirling carvings that almost seemed alive in the dim light. It didn't belong to her. It must have been left behind by the previous tenant. At first, she ignored it, too busy with boxes and books to care, but the mirror seemed to demand her attention. Every time she entered the room, it pulled her gaze. One evening, as she walked past, Emma caught something out of the corner of her eye. A movement, a shadow. She turned sharply, her heart racing, but the room was empty. "Maybe I'm just tired," she muttered, brushing it off. But it happened again and again. Each time, Emma felt certain something wasn't right. The reflection in the mirror didn't always match the room. Books appeared on the wrong shelves. The chair by the window was turned the wrong way. One night, she stopped and stared into the glass. The longer she looked, the stranger it became. The room reflected in the mirror wasn't hers anymore. The walls were covered in cobwebs, the furniture decayed and broken. Then a figure stepped into view. Emma froze. Her reflection smiled, but it wasn't her smile. It was too wide, too sharp. "No," she whispered, "that's not possible." The mirror. Emma raised a hand and beckoned her closer. For days, Emma tried to avoid the mirror. She threw a sheet over it, but somehow it would always end up uncovered. Each time she glanced at it, her reflection stared back, smiling and waving her closer. She knew she should leave the house, call someone, but curiosity gnawed at her, louder than her fear. Finally, one night, she gave in. She reached out to touch the mirror. The surface rippled like water beneath her fingers. Before she could pull back, the reflection's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Emma screamed as she was yanked through. She landed hard on a cold, cracked floor. The air was heavy and sour, the walls around her dark and rotting. She scrambled to her feet and turned back to the mirror. On the other side, her reflection was no longer a reflection. It was her, but it wasn't. The other Emma stood in her living room, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. Then she turned to face the mirror and smiled. "Let me out!" Emma pounded on the glass, but it didn't even tremble. "Please, don't do this." The other Emma tilted her head, mimicking her movements, but there was no sympathy in her eyes. "Why?" Emma's voice cracked. "Why are you doing this?" The other Emma mouthed silently, "I'm free now." Emma sank to the floor, sobbing. When she looked around, she saw she wasn't alone. Fragments of lives were scattered around her, old photographs, torn pages from journals, broken trinkets. She picked up a faded picture of a man and his family. He had written on the back, "Trapped. Don't let it take you. The mirror lies." She understood then. The mirror didn't just trap people. It created new versions of them. Every person who crossed through became a prisoner, doomed to lure the next victim. Emma stared into the mirror, watching her reflection live her life, laughing, moving, and being free. She wasn't a reflection anymore. Emma was. Time passed. Emma couldn't say how long, days, months, years. Then one day, she heard footsteps. A new tenant had moved in. She watched through the glass as a young woman approached the mirror. Emma screamed, pounding on the glass, but the woman couldn't hear her. She bent down to wipe the dust off the frame. "No," Emma whispered, her voice lost in the void. "Don't do it, please." The woman paused, staring at her reflection. Then Emma's lips began to curl into a smile, her body moving on its own. Her hand rose, beckoning. The cycle was starting again. The woman leaned closer to the mirror, her hand reaching out, and Emma's smile grew wider,